January 1945. Western Germany. The town wakes without water. Morning light moves slowly across broken rooftops and shattered windows. Snow sits in the gutters, gray with ash. In the center square, a hand pump stands silent. Women gather around it with metal pails and enamel buckets. They wait out of habit. No one speaks at first. When the handle is pulled, it groans but produces nothing. Only air and the hollow echo of pipes drained days earlier. For weeks, the waterworks have been struck by artillery and sabotage. The main pumping station lies on the edge of town, half collapsed and flooded with debris. German units retreated through the streets 2 nights before, wiring bridges and utilities for demolition. The front moved west to east in a matter of hours. Now the town sits in a strange pause between armies. A column of American vehicles appears just after dawn. Not tanks, not artillery. Trucks with canvas covers and engineer markings stenciled along the sides. Men step down carrying tools instead of rifles. They move toward the damaged pumping station with quiet urgency. By midday, the first metallic vibration begins to travel through the buried pipes beneath the streets. The town does not yet know what that sound means, but it will soon understand why the water stopped and why restoring it became urgent the moment the fighting passed. By the winter of 1944 to 1945, Western Germany had become a landscape of broken systems. Rail lines were cut in segments. Power stations had been bombed repeatedly. Bridges lay twisted into rivers or blown inward toward their own banks. Water infrastructure, less visible but equally vital, had suffered steady damage for more than a year. Strategic bombing campaigns had not always targeted waterworks directly, but pumping stations and filtration plants often stood near rail yards, factories, and electrical grids. When those targets were struck, the municipal systems that fed nearby towns failed with them. The civilian experience of the final war months in Germany was shaped as much by the absence of utilities as by the presence of armies. Cities such as Cologne, Aachen, and Mainz had already endured long periods without consistent running water. Smaller towns in the west faced similar conditions once the front began to move rapidly across the Rhine frontier. Wells became crowded. Rivers turned into supply points. Buckets replaced pipes. Women, older men, and children carried most of the burden. They walked in silence between ruins with whatever containers they could salvage, measuring each day in the number of liters they could carry home. Retreating German forces often worsened the situation. As Allied armies advanced through France and Belgium in late 1944, German military doctrine encouraged the destruction of infrastructure that could assist the enemy. Bridges were wired for demolition. Fuel depots were burned. Communications lines were cut. In some locations, pumping stations and electrical controls were disabled during withdrawal. The intention was to slow pursuit and deny immediate use of facilities. The effect on civilians, however, was immediate and severe. When water systems stopped, disease risk rose quickly. Sanitation failed within days. Hospitals struggled. Refugees moving through towns strained already fragile resources. By January 1945, the Western Front had shifted into Germany itself. American, British, and Allied formations moved across the border in multiple sectors. The pace varied, sometimes slow and contested, sometimes rapid once defensive lines broke. In either case, the pattern that followed capture of a town became familiar. First came combat units securing streets and intersections. Then reconnaissance teams surveyed damage. Shortly after, specialized units moved forward with a different mission: restoration. Among these were engineer units trained not only to build bridges and clear mines, but to repair essential services. Their role had expanded throughout the war. Early campaigns in North Africa and Italy had demonstrated that stabilizing a newly captured town reduced resistance, improved supply flow, and prevented disease outbreaks among both civilians and troops. Water systems became a priority whenever they could be repaired quickly. A functioning pump meant fewer civilian movements across contested areas. It meant cleaner conditions for field hospitals. It meant fewer emergencies competing with military logistics. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and attached engineer combat battalions carried equipment specifically for these tasks. Portable pumps, pipe fittings, purification units, generators, and repair tools traveled in convoys behind advancing divisions. When a town fell within Allied lines, reconnaissance teams evaluated whether the local system could be restored or if temporary solutions were needed. Sometimes repairs took days, sometimes weeks. In rare cases, if damage was limited and access to machinery remained intact, water could return far sooner than civilians expected. Winter conditions made the need urgent. Frozen ground complicated digging. Snow contaminated open water sources. Civilians who had already endured months of scarcity faced additional hardship once temperatures dropped. For Allied commanders, restoring utilities served practical and psychological purposes. It reduced chaos. It signaled control. It demonstrated that the phase of destruction had passed, at least for that location. As January turned toward February 1945, towns across Western Germany experienced this transition in uneven sequence. Some saw heavy fighting and prolonged outages. Others were bypassed or captured quickly, their infrastructure damaged but reparable. In these places, engineer units moved with quiet efficiency, often arriving within hours of combat forces. Their work rarely appeared in headlines, but on the ground it reshaped daily life almost immediately. The town introduced in the opening scene stood within this pattern. Its water had stopped during the retreat. Its pumping station remained partially intact. And just beyond its outskirts, American engineer vehicles were already approaching with a plan formed long before they crossed into Germany. The speed of what followed would depend on preparation, equipment, and decisions made far from the silent hand pump in the square. The responsibility for rapid infrastructure repair in newly captured towns fell primarily to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, reinforced by specialized engineer combat battalions. These units combined combat readiness with technical expertise. Unlike traditional infantry, they carried tools, generators, and pumps alongside weapons. Their mission was twofold: support ongoing operations and stabilize the civilian population to prevent chaos. Each battalion had trained for months in rapid repair techniques, including bridging, road clearance, and utility restoration. Manuals outlined procedures for everything from temporary water supply to emergency electrical connections. Preparation for towns like the one in Western Germany began long before the troops arrived. Intelligence officers mapped local waterworks using aerial reconnaissance, pre-war civil records, and captured German documents. Engineers studied pipe layouts, pumping station capacities, and the locations of reservoirs. By doing so, they could estimate what equipment would be required for immediate repairs, where valves needed to be replaced, and which sections of pipe could be bypassed. Small mobile repair units could then deploy within hours, rather than days, after the main combat forces secured the streets. The equipment itself reflected this foresight. Mobile pumps capable of lifting water from damaged reservoirs or wells were mounted on trucks. Portable purification units allowed engineers to make water potable in the field, even if contamination from debris or broken mains existed. Sections of pipe, couplings, and valves were prefabricated and ready to splice into existing systems. Generator sets could power electric pumps when substations were offline. All of this allowed engineers to begin work immediately, often under the watchful eyes of civilians who had not seen running water for weeks. The psychological dimension of restoration was equally significant. Civilians who saw the rapid return of water often shifted from fear to cautious relief. 4 German women and children carrying buckets through snow and mud. The sight of engineers preparing pumps and stretching hoses across streets was disorienting and, at times, astonishing. It signaled the presence of a disciplined, capable force, one whose priorities included not only military objectives, but also civilian welfare. American military doctrine emphasized that restored utilities reduced disorder, limited disease outbreaks, and encouraged cooperation, all of which freed troops to focus on the broader campaign. Security was always a concern. Engineers often worked with minimal escort at first, clearing debris and inspecting sabotage. Mines, damaged mains, and unexploded ordnance presented real hazards. Yet experience from previous campaigns in France and the Low Countries had shown that rapid action yielded both military and civilian advantages. By the time local civilians realized that water was flowing again, the operation was typically well underway. Coordination with combat units ensured efficiency. Infantry and armor secured the area, preventing interference or looting. Engineers moved in quickly, connecting bypass lines, repairing ruptured mains, and purifying water for immediate use. They documented the condition of pumps, measured flow rates, and adjusted valves to match town demand. What might have taken weeks under peacetime conditions was compressed into hours through planning, equipment, and discipline. In towns like the one in our opening scene, this combination of preparation, mobility, and technical skill produced moments of stark civilian astonishment. The women gathering at empty pumps could scarcely imagine that within hours, water would pour back into their buckets. The pipes beneath the streets, once silent and dry, would carry life again. That moment marked more than the return of a basic utility. It represented the arrival of order, competence, and a vision of the Allies not only as conquerors, but as organizers capable of rebuilding essential life systems almost immediately. The scene was set. Civilians stood frozen with anticipation, snow crunching under their feet. Engineers approached the station, tools in hand. The stage for the town's transformation, from desolation to the hum of running water, was now prepared. The next phase would show the human, tactical, and technological angles of this remarkable operation. Human angle. Civilians confront scarcity. The morning air hung heavy with frost and tension. Women, carrying empty buckets and tin pails, moved through streets lined with rubble. Their faces were pale from cold and anxiety. Many had not seen running water for days, some for weeks. Children clung to their skirts, shivering. Every household relied on the few functioning wells or captured cisterns. The daily routine had become a test of endurance, hauling water from distant sources, rationing, and navigating streets littered with debris. Simple acts, once mundane, had become critical tasks in the absence of infrastructure. When the first American trucks rumbled into the square, their markings unfamiliar, eyes widened. Some women froze, others stepped back. The presence of soldiers was not in itself unusual. Occupation was always accompanied by caution, but the engineers moved with deliberate purpose, unarmed for the moment, carrying tools instead of rifles. Civilians observed silently, watching men direct teams, unfold hoses, and assess collapsed pipes. Their disbelief was both emotional and practical. Could the water actually return so quickly? The tension was palpable, yet hope stirred quietly. Women who had scavenged ice from rooftops, collected melted snow, and rationed every drop now glimpsed the possibility of relief. The human emotion, a mixture of astonishment, relief, and cautious optimism, became a backdrop for the technical work unfolding. By mid-morning, as pumps were lowered into wells and hoses stretched across streets, small conversations began. Whispered questions. Will it really work? How long before the first drops? Eyes darted to the frost-lined pipes, awaiting proof. Engineer perspective. Discipline under pressure. For the engineers, the work was precise and urgent. They had trained for these moments, restoring essential services in war zones under minimal notice. Their manuals emphasized speed without sacrificing safety. Each man had a role. One operated a generator, another positioned a pump, a third prepared replacement valves and couplings. Teams moved with choreographed efficiency, communicating with gestures and brief commands. The challenges were immediate. Cold froze lubricants, frost heaved pipes, debris blocked access. Yet prior reconnaissance had prepared them. Engineers knew the layout of the system, had pre-positioned spare equipment, and anticipated structural weaknesses. What seemed chaotic to civilians, men scrambling over rubble, lifting hoses, adjusting pumps, was in fact a controlled operation designed to deliver results within hours. The American presence was silent authority in motion. Soldiers did not shout orders unnecessarily. Movements were purposeful. The visible coordination reassured the cautious German women. These men were not looters, not occupiers seeking revenge, but problem solvers in uniform. This distinction mattered as civilians observed, noted, and processed the unusual sight of men working for their benefit, not merely their own military advantage. Tactical angle, securing the system. Restoring water in a recently captured town required more than pumps. Engineers and combat units coordinated to ensure the safety of repair sites. The front lines remained nearby. Unexploded ordnance and abandoned defensive measures presented hazards. Infantry provided perimeter security while engineers entered the pumping station. Reconnaissance teams had already scouted damaged mains, identified sabotage points, and flagged unsafe areas. Tactical planning minimized risk and maximized efficiency. Routes were cleared quickly, debris removed, and vulnerable pipe sections shored up. Civilians were instructed to maintain distance from active work areas. The combination of tactical foresight and physical preparation allowed engineers to operate under real conditions of uncertainty, keeping both men and civilians safe while returning water. Technological angle. Pumps, pipes, and purification. The backbone of rapid restoration was technology. Engineers relied on mobile pumps capable of drawing water from damaged wells or reservoirs. Mounted on trucks or carried in sections, these pumps could move hundreds of gallons per hour, bridging gaps in broken mains or bypassing collapsed systems entirely. Hoses stretched across streets, threaded through rubble, and connected to temporary valves, creating a makeshift but functional network. Purification was equally critical. Even if pipes were intact, contamination from debris or floodwater posed a serious health risk. Portable filtration units removed sediment and disinfected water with chlorine tablets or rudimentary chemical treatments. By mid-morning, engineers could deliver potable water to central distribution points within hours, an achievement remarkable to civilians who had faced prolonged shortages. Small adjustments to valves and flow rates, guided by pressure gauges and field experience, ensured steady delivery without rupturing fragile pipes. Every tool and method had been tested under previous campaigns. Lessons from Normandy and the Netherlands shaped best practices, rapid deployment, modular repair, and the ability to work under minimal support. For the German women watching, it was difficult to grasp the combination of equipment and expertise that allowed water to return almost immediately. What had seemed impossible became tangible, flowing from hoses into metal pails with steady, reassuring force. Leadership angle, decisions that made it possible. Effective restoration depended on leadership at multiple levels. Company commanders coordinated with battalion engineers, ensuring teams arrived with the correct equipment. Officers assessed damage reports from reconnaissance and prioritized repairs according to both military and civilian need. Quick decision-making, such as which valves to replace first or where to deploy portable pumps, determined whether water returned within hours or days. The engineers themselves were disciplined by leadership but empowered to act on site. Senior NCOs directed workflow with precision, while junior officers and squad leaders ensured coordination across teams. This decentralized yet structured approach allowed for rapid adaptation to unexpected damage, such as frozen valves or debris-blocked mains, while maintaining overall operational momentum. Leadership created not only efficiency, but confidence among civilians observing the work. Moral and psychological angle, civilian shock and relief. The psychological impact on the population was immediate. German women, accustomed to scarcity, stood in disbelief as hoses fed pails and buckets. Some whispered to one another, pointing, unable to comprehend the speed. The presence of American engineers, organized and competent, contrasted sharply with the chaos of retreating German units. Relief, astonishment, and cautious hope blended into an emotional tableau. This moment had a larger moral effect as well. Demonstrating care for civilian needs helped stabilize newly occupied areas, reduced the risk of unrest, and fostered cooperation. Engineers were not merely repairing pipes. They were signaling a shift in authority, a moment where human necessity intersected with military competence. For many civilians, the return of water was more than a practical convenience. It was proof that order could follow destruction, that survival remained possible, and that life, even in the middle of war, could regain small rhythms of normalcy. The sun had climbed higher over the ruined rooftops, casting long shadows across frost-lined streets. Inside the partially collapsed pumping station, American engineers moved with deliberate speed. Valves were tightened, hoses connected, and portable pumps engaged. Generators roared to life, shaking the concrete floor with mechanical insistence. Every adjustment was critical. The wrong connection could rupture pipes or flood streets already laden with snow and debris. Outside, German women clustered near the central square. Buckets and pails were raised, some trembling in anticipation. Children pressed close, their small fingers clenching cold metal handles. The first hiss of water escaping a pipe brought startled glances. Engineers monitored pressure gauges, fine-tuning the flow as ice-caked mains resisted. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, suddenly, a thin stream appeared at the nearest hydrant. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Hands clasped together. Eyes widened. Within moments, the stream thickened, gaining volume and momentum. Buckets were lowered, collecting clean, flowing water for the first time in days. The sound, a steady rush through pipes, filled the square, replacing the heavy silence of scarcity. Women cried quietly, some holding their children, others staring in awe at the miraculous return of an ordinary necessity. For them, this was no longer a technical operation. It was life itself returning in measured, tangible form. The engineers continued to work without haste, aware that failure at this stage could undo hours of preparation. Pipes were reinforced, bypass lines secured, and flow stabilized across the main thoroughfare. Tension gave way to rhythm as water reached secondary distribution points. Soldiers moved efficiently, exchanging brief nods, their focus absolute. Meanwhile, civilians adjusted to the sudden abundance. Some ran to collect more, others simply stood and watched. The juxtaposition was stark. Weeks of hardship replaced almost instantly by the quiet miracle of a functioning water system. The impact extended beyond immediate utility. It signaled order, stability, and the presence of a force capable of restoring normalcy even in the midst of war. By midday, the pumps operated at full capacity. Engineers had restored enough flow to supply most homes, providing a level of service previously thought impossible under wartime conditions. The town square buzzed with a mixture of disbelief and relief. What had seemed like an insurmountable problem had been solved in hours. The civilians' astonishment, especially among women who bore the brunt of daily survival, was profound. The work in the central pumping station was just the beginning. Engineers moved outward, inspecting secondary mains, clearing debris, and ensuring each neighborhood could access water. The operation demonstrated not only technical skill, but coordination, planning, and discipline. Every valve replaced, every pipe connected, reinforced the immediate transformation of a town once paralyzed by scarcity. In this moment, the convergence of preparation, technology, human endurance, and leadership reached its peak. The first drops had turned into steady streams. Silent streets filled with the sound of flowing water. Women, previously resigned to empty pails, now carried buckets brimming with liquid, their faces reflecting shock, relief, and quiet wonder. The stage was set for the final phase of the town's transformation, when water reached every corner and civilians began to reclaim daily life amidst the ruins of war. By early afternoon, the operation had moved beyond the central square. Engineers fanned out along side streets, following secondary mains and checking connections at every junction. Hoses snaked across rubble-strewn alleys, occasionally diverted around collapsed walls. Portable pumps hummed steadily, and the steady roar of flowing water filled spaces that had been silent for weeks. Civilians, initially hesitant, began to follow the engineers, observing with a mixture of awe and relief. German women, who had carried frozen pails from distant wells, now moved alongside newly flowing hydrants. They dipped buckets into the streams, marveling at the unbroken flow. Some hesitated, as if cautious of a trick. Others whispered to neighbors, "It is real, it is coming back." Children splashed cautiously, laughter breaking the tense monotony that had defined the morning. The shock of scarcity gave way to astonishment at the speed and competence of the work. Within the pumping station, the engineers coordinated every valve, every bypass, ensuring even neighborhoods far from the square received water. Generators powered electric pumps that fed lines blocked by ice and debris. Pressure gauges monitored flow. Temporary reinforcements prevented surges from bursting fragile sections. The meticulous attention to detail allowed a system that had been silent for days to operate efficiently within hours. Leadership decisions were evident everywhere. Squad leaders assigned men to high-priority connections. NCOs ensured tools were distributed efficiently. Communication was constant but quiet, a contrast to the chaotic scene of civilian observation. This coordination reduced mistakes and minimized downtime, guaranteeing that water would reach every household. From a civilian perspective, the speed was almost incomprehensible. In one small street, women lined up with buckets and pots, waiting to fill them directly from newly patched mains. Some wept quietly, others smiled through exhaustion. The presence of the engineers, working with calm precision, contrasted sharply with the turmoil of the prior weeks. Retreating German units, destroyed utilities, and the constant anxiety of scarcity. By mid-afternoon, water reached the furthest corners of the town. The sound of flowing water replaced the silence of a frozen, desolate town. Pumps continued to hum. Hoses were adjusted. Connections reinforced. Every street had access, every household a supply. Civilians, especially women who bore the daily burden of gathering water, now had the practical relief that signaled not only survival, but a return to order. This moment was more than technical success. It represented the convergence of military planning, engineering expertise, and human endurance. The town, once immobilized by scarcity and fear, now had access to a vital resource that restored routine, hygiene, and confidence. Women carried full buckets back to their homes. Children played briefly near hydrants, and the hum of pumps became a background rhythm that reassured everyone in sight. The decisive turning point was complete. The silence of empty pipes had been replaced with the steady, life-giving flow of water. Civilians absorbed the reality of the change, understanding that this rapid restoration was a demonstration of order, efficiency, and a larger Allied presence. The technical and human achievement of hours became an indelible moment, bridging scarcity and survival, despair and relief. As evening approached, the town had transitioned from the uncertainty of the morning to the stability of functioning utilities. Yet the consequences of this operation extended beyond the immediate moment, shaping both civilian morale and military strategy in the region. The aftermath, relief, medical improvements, and psychological reassurance would follow, marking a shift in the town's wartime experience. By the following morning, the town had settled into a new rhythm. The hand pumps and repaired mains had restored a sense of order that had been absent for weeks. Women carried buckets along cleared streets with a mixture of confidence and disbelief, their movements measured now by the predictable arrival of water rather than the uncertainty of empty wells. Hospitals, which had struggled to maintain sanitation, were able to clean wards and care for patients more effectively. Kitchens resumed basic hygiene, and temporary shelters could provide potable water for those displaced by prior fighting. Reports from the engineers emphasized efficiency. Within hours of entering the town, they had connected key mains, repaired damaged valves, and deployed temporary pumps. Flow rates measured at central points indicated sufficient supply for most households. Crews remained on site, monitoring pressure, adjusting connections, and troubleshooting minor leaks. By evening, the entire municipal network operated near full capacity, a restoration that under peacetime conditions might have required days or weeks. The psychological effect on civilians, particularly women, was profound. After enduring weeks of scarcity, the rapid return of water fostered trust in the occupying forces and reduced fear of immediate collapse. Residents began to coordinate small daily routines around the flowing water, fetching, storing, and sharing. Local leaders and remaining municipal staff observed the operation, noting the discipline, speed, and professionalism of the engineers. Even in wartime, the restoration of a basic utility reinforced the sense of stability and reliability. From a military perspective, the operation also had strategic value. By stabilizing civilian life, Allied forces minimized potential unrest or interference that could disrupt supply lines or post-combat occupation efforts. Soldiers could focus on forward operations rather than policing desperate crowds seeking water. Documentation from the Corps of Engineers highlighted the dual effect: engineering success and psychological pacification. Reports emphasized that towns where utilities were quickly restored experienced fewer conflicts between troops and civilians and displayed higher cooperation with occupation authorities. The restored water system also supported public health. Disease outbreaks were mitigated, and the risk of contamination in makeshift wells decreased. Hospitals were able to perform procedures with improved hygiene. Even rudimentary public kitchens could operate, distributing rations efficiently. For women responsible for the daily survival of households, the shift was immediately tangible. Cooking, cleaning, and bathing became possible again, restoring small but essential aspects of normal life. By the end of the first day after restoration, the town had begun to absorb the reality of change. Conversations in streets and doorways centered on the engineers' efficiency, the sudden arrival of flowing water, and the unexpected speed of repair. Astonishment, relief, and quiet gratitude marked the emotional landscape, especially among women who had been at the center of household survival during the outage. The groundwork was now set for longer-term stabilization. Engineers continued monitoring, while the military established basic security to prevent sabotage or interference. The town had experienced a tangible shift in daily life within hours, a rare demonstration of how rapid, organized technical intervention could influence both civilian morale and the operational environment during wartime. In the days following the restoration, the town began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Women carried buckets with measured steps, children followed, and men checked distribution points to ensure everyone had access. The restored water system allowed households to resume basic domestic tasks: washing clothes, preparing meals, and maintaining hygiene. The difference was more than convenience. It was survival, order, and a reprieve from weeks of scarcity and anxiety. Allied military records from early 1945 note that rapid restoration of utilities was a recurring practice across captured German towns. Engineer combat battalions, using lessons learned in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, emphasized efficiency and civilian stabilization. In many towns, particularly in the Rhineland and Westphalia, civilians reportedly expressed amazement at the speed and organization of repair operations. The psychological impact was significant. Cooperation increased, incidents of theft or disorder decreased, and local municipal staff were able to resume administrative functions under Allied supervision. Beyond civilian morale, the operation had tangible operational benefits. Secure and functioning towns allowed supply convoys to operate without interruption, field hospitals to manage patients effectively, and troops to focus on frontline objectives rather than resource disputes. The restored water system also enabled engineers to conduct further reconstruction with confidence, knowing that basic life support was secure. In practical terms, this efficiency freed resources and time for the ongoing push deeper into Germany. For the German population, particularly women responsible for household management, the restoration symbolized a rare moment of order amid chaos. It highlighted the competence and discipline of American engineers and demonstrated the capacity of organized military forces to provide immediate, practical assistance. Observers documented the astonishment of civilians. The sudden arrival of running water became a story repeated across small towns in Western Germany. In many cases, women expressed relief so profound that it bordered on disbelief, reinforcing the narrative of engineering skill intersecting with human necessity. From a historical perspective, the event illustrates the broader significance of Allied logistical planning and civil-military coordination. The war was not only a contest of weapons and territory, but also of infrastructure and essential services. Engineers who restored water in hours exemplified a dimension of military effectiveness that combined technical expertise, strategic foresight, and an understanding of human needs. The tangible outcome, flowing water in previously desolate towns, served both military objectives and humanitarian purposes, providing a quiet yet powerful counterpoint to the destruction of war. By the end of this phase, the town streets no longer echoed with the silence of empty mains. Water flowed steadily, residents adjusted their routines, and the engineers prepared to move on to the next location. The operation's success had immediate consequences for morale, health, and military efficiency, and it left a lasting impression on those who witnessed it. The stage was now set for reflection, a calm appraisal of the significance of restoration amid conflict, and the enduring lessons it offered for humanity and history. The restoration of water in a single German town in January 1945 may seem small against the vast scale of the war. Yet it embodies a profound lesson about the intersection of human need, technical skill, and military organization. Engineers, moving with precision and purpose, turned desolation into life-sustaining order within hours. For the civilians, particularly women who had borne the daily burden of survival, this was more than water. It was reassurance, a tangible sign that stability could follow destruction. In the broader context of the Allied advance into Germany, such operations were quietly transformative. They demonstrated that warfare was not only about movement of troops or destruction of enemy positions, but also about shaping environments, managing human needs, and preserving life where possible. The swift restoration of utilities mitigated chaos, reduced disease, and fostered cooperation between occupiers and the local population. Historically, these actions reveal the often overlooked dimension of military effectiveness, the ability to restore normalcy even amidst conflict. They remind us that the impact of war is not solely measured in battles won or lost, but in the small, decisive acts that restore routine, dignity, and safety to civilians caught in its path. As the pumps flowed and the town regained a rhythm of life, women and families reclaimed ordinary routines once taken for granted. The memory of those hours, the shock, the relief, the quiet astonishment, lingered far longer than the hum of machinery. In them, history records not only the technical achievement of American engineers, but also the resilience of human communities confronted with adversity and the enduring capacity for restoration even amid the ruins of war.